Yes, we're following on from the A&E theme. Yesterday morning, I very nervously discussed the difficulties with waiting in the waiting room at the A&Es and how we could solve that. And part of our mission was to find out as much about it as possible. So this was our challenge: understanding the flow, understanding the assets and the staff and how they're used. And if you look here, this is a screen grab of today's live amount of patients in lots of different A&Es around Wales. This shows the time to get to triage, to get to the clinician over the last few years. But actually, I've waited there for 12 hours, so I'm thinking these are very optimistic outputs personally. I don't know who actually did these. What the data tells us, this is actually quite an interesting slide, because on the left-hand side, you've got 31,600 people who don't need a follow-up, so probably could have been dealt with by somebody else. Admissions, 4,000 self-discharge, other ones are all okay, transfer to different things, but so it's an interesting slide in terms of what's actually happening in terms of the journey. But to deal with this and to try and understand it better, I'm going to pass you over to Alex, who is the genius in the team.
I wouldn't call myself a genius.
Oh yes,
right.
I would.
Right, so basically from this, what we decided, or at least I had the idea, and then again I apologise for falling in here for kind of taking over a little bit. But
Keep going.
I'll allow it.
Another way?
Keep
Keep going.
Do you want to put that on?
No, don't worry.
Okay, this might be what to show you all the problems with A&E when we weren't quite sure what's going on in communication. So what we decided to do was to basically build a system model of an A&E department. So rather than just purely relying on data, can we actually build effectively a reference architecture simulation that would allow us to predict how A&E departments will perform based on varying things like the number of stations, the number of treatment facilities, etc., etc. So in the last 24-ish hours, we implemented effectively a reference architecture. The model itself is effectively a transient simulator, so it's not discrete event simulation for those who know what that means. It's too limited for our needs. It's effectively a transient time stepper which can wrap or does wrap a very basic at the moment agent-based model on the top of it. And the idea primarily with this is rather than just trying to look at data and what has happened, it allows us to actually understand what the impact will be of making decisions on the design of these systems, so things that might not have happened yet. So what we're thinking is that this has applications both at the tactical and strategic level, enabling people on the front line to potentially understand or reflect on what's happened day to day, but then also for managers and people looking at strategic investment, where best to put their effort by understanding investment. So we can apply lots of arbitrary quantitative metrics over this, but for example, just here in the top right there, you can see that, for example, looking at the occupancy of the different systems or different stations in the system to understand how much is being used, and lots of other stuff on top of that. So yeah, that's kind of the work we've been doing in a nutshell.
I'm going to share some of the learning from the project, and I think I'll add, I think this is complementary to the last one. I think we're tackling two different parts of the problem, but they're complementary. And we did want to look at the whole of flow, recognising we couldn't, it's impossible, so just to acknowledge that. So we learned about being open-minded, the importance of being multi-professional, collaboration, and the positivity of Hack, but also a bit of frustration around some of the old challenges. What would we do differently? Make sure we spent a bit more time up front introducing ourselves and what we did so we can make the most of our skill sets, recognise the quality of our diverse contributions and keep ourselves to scope.
For your work tomorrow, try and think about what they learned. Well done. Have we any questions? Give judges first pass there. Do you want to ask anything? Okay, Chris?
So, I'm interested in the concept of digital twins.
Yes.
How far away are you from getting something that you could start to collect data to start to build it?
Well, that is one. I mean, we basically built some very novel.
You've got enough data in.
We basically set, rather than having to try and find data sources, just as examples, these guys very handily gave me some examples of personal experiences they've had, and we use that to construct a very simple A&E department with a few different patient pathways flowing through it and the sort of treatments that will be involved in that, and then effectively a bit of Monte Carlo analysis over that to understand, like if everybody arrived at the same time, right throughout the day, all that sort of stuff.
And who would you see using this in an
Yeah, go on.
We did discuss this, so I think we'd initially want to, adoption's really important, so we'd initially want to share it with a group of stakeholders. That could be your business managers, your clinical leads, your finance department, your, whatever that looks like, to sort of get that feedback, get them to buy into it and then iterate it with them to make sure it's used, or it would just sit on a shelf and be useless.
And there's one other thing that we learned from it, which I think is a very important experience, is the importance of feedback and the importance of taking on feedback. There's no point in saying, here's a better suggestion if you're not going to implement it. So implementation is critical.
There's no intervention or no changes you can make.
Time.
I'm data modeler, yeah. Any other questions?
What do you think are some of the challenges about implementing agent-based modelling in a clinical environment with clinical processes and clinicians' opinions and things like that?
It's probably a fancy thing for you, Francis.
All that I can say is the most important thing about what's been done here and the skills that sort of Alex has been showing us, and in answer to the lady's question there, is that this interface can be used by perhaps the least experienced, clinically experienced person who's on that shift is sent to the triage. So in other words, whoever is using it, and in terms of patient safety, the skills from the NHS coders, mathematicians, engineers who are helping clinicians and patients and families. It's most important. What I've learned here in the last 2 days is what people are doing from different interdisciplinary backgrounds to come together to protect our most important and precious asset in the UK, our NHS. I've worked overseas, I've seen different systems, I've worked in different systems. How lucky we are here in the UK, that's what I was to say.
Yeah.
Thank you for the